Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for being here. Thank you, India Fashion Forum, for giving us this platform. And really, we couldn't ask for a better segue into our session after what ICH, what Anu and Kanika presented, how relevant craft is today. It's been relevant for a while, but it's more relevant today than it has ever been. With that, I'll quickly introduce the eminent panel, and it gives me immense pleasure to say, all the panels that we have had in India Fashion Forum, I would imagine everyone so accomplished because they have a deep sense of passion for what they do and what they've done so far. But this panel is really special because I think each of us, I am almost an outsider to this panel, but each of us bring almost a sense of purpose to this with their passion, with their sense of passion. Manish, who has straddled the world of big brands, but have a very, very deep sense of purpose and passion for crafts. He has been involved with Crafts Council in India, has had his own handwoven label, and now leads Aadyam Handwoven. Kanchana, who leads a fantastically named organization, Network of Indian Cultural Enterprises, ORG, will know a little more about what they do. Ravi, who is the vice president of Aditya Birla ABFRL, ABLBL, I get confused these days. But he brings in the large business perspective. We have Kunal, who moved from FMCG world to leather crafts and a very, very deep association of developing craft clusters through his ventures. And Swikruti, who is the youngest but not the least, who has been a fashion researcher, sustainable practice researcher, and now a founder of a conscious fashion label called Rustic. So without further ado, I'll start with Manish, actually. Manish, like we have been chatting, you have had this unique position, and then you have gone and created Aadyam Handwoven, which is where seemingly there is no constraint. It's a high-end handwoven products label. You have a large corporate backing, almost ideal place. And what's been your challenges and experience of this mind-to-market journey?
So I think I'll just start by clarifying that while it is funded by the Aditya Birla Group, but we work like a startup because it is funded by the trust and it is considered as a social enterprise. So it's a not-for-profit, and therefore, being a social enterprise, we get a limited set of funds, which we have to make as efficient as we can, and obviously then also have a business plan attached to it. So it does work truly like a startup with a very, very lean team, and I think that's why I enjoy it even more. But yes, coming to your question, so I love the term mind to market, but that pretty much covers the entire gamut, but I'll take specifics and answer them. So if I touch upon mind first, while building the team itself, I think it was a big challenge because there is no team that exists for sensitivity towards handloom. So I think it is something where you need it in your team to be that way, to be able to understand how to firstly interact with weaving communities, because they are not like vendors. They are not regular vendors. They are actually, in some form, they are artists. In some form, they are not even commercially driven. They are actually driven by just their skill and craft. So you have to treat them the same way. So I think to be able to get a team which can actually get sensitized to this way of working itself was a big challenge. However, once having said that team, I think it also becomes important then to be able to bring the design sensibility, because you're treading on something where you're actually playing with heritage. And therefore, it's a responsibility that you have to see that how much can you actually sort of manipulate, how much can you make it trend-worthy, how much can you actually balance it. And that becomes a really big challenge because, a craft has to have its signature intact. So no matter what you do, of course, you have to make it relevant. We even make it relevant for the global markets, for example, especially in the home category. But I think the craft signature has to remain, otherwise it becomes very easily competitive. Because if you do not make it look like what it was supposed to look, then you can replicate it anywhere, and tomorrow anything else can take over. So that becomes the next challenge. However, then comes the third challenge of sourcing, and like I said earlier, that the people have to be sensitive enough to be able to get the sourcing right, because there will be all those kind of challenges, there will be quality issues, there will be infrastructure issues, because we want to make them work in their closest environments. So I don't think we want to make it look like something which is now a factory, because the weavers work best when they work from their home, work from their own shed. So you have to now get into this whole mold of making them work, but with quality consciousness, but with the right kind of infrastructure that makes it still deliver a good quality product, and which is where the whole sourcing wing comes in. So that, again, at every cluster, we built a team to make sure that happens. And then coming lastly, but to the market, which is the biggest challenge, because the consumer is not ready to, accept it. Because there are, for every product, there is a parallel product which looks like it, and it does not make you understand that what is real, what is authentic, what is handloom, what is non-handloom, and therefore the consumer stops converting after a certain price point. And that then becomes the challenge of the marketeer, to now say that how do you actually keep the authenticity intact, and not just keep it intact, but also communicate that authenticity and make sure that the customer is actually buying it for that and for the love of it, rather than actually for just, what the product is visibly there. Because visibly, a lot of other products look similar nowadays, and every single day technology is advancing, and it's actually giving you product which is replicable. So yeah, so that becomes the final and the biggest challenge, but I think I can come back to the retail side a bit more when we talk about that.
Sure, thanks Manish. And we'll go to Swikruti, who brings in, I would imagine, a lot of what Manish said would resonate with you. So you want to share your experience?
Thank you for the question. When I heard about the term mind to market, I'm very impressed that has been expressed as that way. But when I started working with the weavers community, specifically in the western part of the state of Odisha, the mind to market journey has been really challenging and complex. So if I have to break it down into 3 key aspects, then there is constant supply chain constraints always, because of the craft clusters, villages. Commutation is a real challenge. The connectivity in the villages, and then there are infrastructure and capital and everything. Then there is constantly, evolving expectations of the consumers out of these products from craft clusters. All the consumers today also expect everything fast, even from villages. Hand-woven products or any handicraft product for that matter. So the gap between the understanding of variety of consumer sets and then producing accordingly, or to do best what all the artisans' families know, there is a gap which sometimes they fail to understand, and it is on the part of responsibility of the individuals or designers or even organizations who want to collaborate with them at the same level. And the third one is, the most important, is the realities in the villages. That the first and foremost thing that one faces challenge and when get to the grassroots level is gaining the faith or winning the trust of the weavers. Suddenly they feel intimidated by if somebody comes to work with them, and particularly when they do not belong to their community. So the bonding there is so strong that most of the time they do not even feel the need to collaborate with somebody else or outsiders. Because if I talk about the the scenario, specifically in the state of Odisha, the local market is quite huge there. So the weavers there are never never running out of work, or so even the state government has made it mandatory in all across the universities that they have introduced hand-woven clothes as uniforms. So all the colleges, whichever district you go, you will find them as uniforms in one color. And also in the small local offices, that the hand-woven shirts are mandatory for men and hand-woven saris or salwar suits are mandatory for women. So they are constantly, the looms are always busy. But then there are also other markets like production of any specific occasion which will prove their maximum artistic skills, and they will also enjoy doing that. And there are other aspects that master weavers, they are always, they crave for more recognitions, and they busy themselves making and award-worthy pieces or so. So when all these things are simultaneously happening, so the first thing that, getting started with them was winning the trust of them. So when I started understanding this, I actually completely transformed myself as if I am one of the weavers communities. So I also mastered in the dialect of language that they speak. So even if I belong to the same native place, but it's a fact that I do not belong to their communities. So it's just like regularly spending more time with them, knowing their culture. So by understanding their culture, it became easier to identify them as per their strengths and skill sets. Like for some weavers' families, they are very much comfortable weaving regular yardages or everyday wear like that. Some were very much, they are more handy with upgraded skills or updated techniques. So it was easier for them to collaborate on that level for different collections. Then also there were a group of people or the present generation who are more experimental, and they are open for material explorations or experimenting with different dyes and other techniques. So it became easier for me to work with them in that aspect. But it has never been easy, but there is immense scope that if we have that kind of approach which would be welcoming by them, then it's very easy to work with them.
You gave a very wonderful example, because just wanted to share that Odisha actually is one handloom sector where 70% of the consumption is actually done in the state itself.
Yes.
And therefore, that's a beautiful ecosystem, which is how we used to be earlier. But now it has gotten fragmented, and the actual village communities have moved to totally mass market product. But the other thing I wanted to say was the trust thing. And
Yeah.
I think which is where I think that sensitivity thing that I was talking about.
Exactly.
But I think what has really marred their mind is that how many times have they been cheated? So, there have been various brands which have gone and sort of negotiated, and they've gone on sort of without really understanding as to why it is what it is and what should the costing of that product be. They have looked at it from their point of view and have tried to source it at a certain price point, which doesn't work out at all.
Transparency is the key there, that the brands or individuals, whoever want to work with them, they also have to be 100% genuine and honest with the people they are working with every stakeholder.
So, wonderful. When she was telling me we were having a chat before this, this is fantastic. A state that supports its craft sector so much, but it has its own challenges. But we talked about, so far we have talked about a craft business, really heritage craft business. But, I want to go to Kunal to understand, who has been through Renaissance Crafts and Swadharma, has been working with craft clusters to create not only using the heritage techniques, but create very, very modern products for large brands and boutique brands in India and abroad. So you want to bring in that perspective.
Sure, thanks, Samrat. Kanika, first of all, congratulations, wonderful presentation, loved it. So I'll give a quick background, Samrat, just to put it in context. So early days was ITC, large corporation, processes, very different supply chain mechanisms. 96, I ended up with a brand called High Design, which at that time, people hadn't really heard of. It was selling in UK in all the big department stores. But in India, we started the brand building exercise when I teamed up. And I joined as co-entrepreneur, and then we built out the brand in India, and then eventually took it to many countries overseas. It was during the high design experience that I realized how people respond to handmade products worldwide. So we charge premium. So we were selling at 2.5 times the Indian retail price point. So that's the kind of value that people associated with good handmade products. And 2008, when Louis Vuitton was looking at taking a stake in high design, that's the time when I said, listen, there's a larger opportunity I see, and I see that we've inherited skill sets in this country, which we've not really done justice with. And that's when I started getting a little deeper. So I moved out of high design and I started exploring crafts. We set up a venture called Caravan. We built a brand. We ran it for a while. But then I think we were trying to do too many things at the same time. And we worked across 31 clusters. We've trained about 17,000 artisans. But the single brand wasn't able to deliver the kind of width and depth that we had, that we'd ended up creating as an infrastructure. So eventually when COVID hit, we decided to wind down the brand completely. In the meantime, what had started happening was a bunch of brands overseas had started reaching out and began conversations because of the kind of work that they saw that we were doing. So over the last more than 4 years now, we've been working with Ralph Lauren for their highest end brand, which is RRL, where we do woven fabrics. So the first thing that we did for them was a cotton fabric with hand-spun yarn, and something that they ended up making into an unlined jacket, which was selling at $700. So that's the value perception of a product that's really. So I'll take a step back now. When we look at product and we look at a consumer's relationship with a product, there are 3 reasons why a consumer buys a product, right? There's a functional aspect to the product. There's an aesthetic appeal. And there's a story. So when you look at luxury brands around the world, these 3 components are in good measure. And the story actually enhances the appeal for the brand, and therefore they command the price that they do. What we found is that the crafts that we've inherited, they come with the story, right? There's a very, very deep story associated with each of the traditional practices that we have. The aesthetics are beautiful. They may not fit into the sensibilities or the trends as we see them, but that's the easier part to address, to align the aesthetics to current trends. The difficult part is the functional aspect. And I'll specifically pause here to talk about, so when we're doing fabrics and textiles in particular, because that's where the large play can happen. Usually the textile, except for the fact when you use a particular kind of yarn, that creates a signature on the product. There's not much of a craft signature really, right? So it's more about making sure that the fabric performs and is comparable in terms of its performance to, let's say, any mill-made fabric. And therefore, the customer is comfortable paying that price for it, because you're not going to take a subpar product, right? You're not going to pay, whatever, $700 or $800 for a product. That's not going to perform. So our emphasis has always been on addressing the functional gaps, working with these communities. And so introduction of yarns, introduction of practices. So over the last few years, we've actually kind of honed this, and we've been working with a number of buyers overseas. But as of the last 2 years, now what we've said is that instead of just being the supply chain for international buyers, we've put together a platform now where we're supporting entrepreneurs who want to build brands. So we want to support them to build brands which can go global. And 2 of them have just gone live, where we do the entire product solution for them. So we sit down with the founder, we figure out an opportunity that we see. We look at 2 caveats. The first being that each brand represents a single, very sharp product type, product category. And the product should necessarily have a component that comes from a traditional craft community. The second is that we see the business scale to about 100 crores in 5 years. And then, there are a bunch of us who provide mentorship as they progress, and we provide capital. So, it's an ecosystem that we've kind of created to support these brands. So the two that have gone live, and I'll just give you an example of the kind of work that we do. One is we're working with a couple in Delhi for school bags for kids from the ages of 2 to 8 because their needs change very, very rapidly during that age group. And the harness on the backpack is something that's hand knitted. And the performance of the harness is such that, so it does two things. One is the way it's been created, it sits much more snugly on the child. And therefore it doesn't shift ergonomically much better. The second is that it's much softer on the child because it's spread much broader. So we have actually coined it as hug bag instead of a backpack, and we've trademarked the word hug bag. So the brand is Philly and Me. They've started taking pre-orders. The second one is a footwear brand called Veni. Veni is actually the braid, where we're working with these artisans who make Kolhapuri chappals. And there's a large community of artisans in North Karnataka that do this. So we take the braids from them, integrate it into a product that's much more sophisticated, much more comfortable, much more aligned to international trends. So that's the idea. The idea is to demonstrate a path forward for traditional practices to integrate into contemporary fashion and consumer needs. So the session just before us actually was an interesting session. And as I was listening, I was just thinking to myself, there are two trends that are almost contradictory at play here. One is this extremely high-paced, high-fashion, fast fashion trend. And the other is, this other world which is moving towards slow fashion. And I think a lot of the traditional practices that we have lend themselves to slow fashion rather than the fast fashion world. Because these practices, they take time, both for development. So we work with long calendars. We work with brands that have enough time for development and then they go through tests. For example, we're working with a French design house right now, and we're developing a fabric for upholstery, which is again handmade. And it has to pass through Martindale's test, which is really rigorous, right? And it has to compete or compare and be on par with something that's polyester and mill-made, right? So you see the conflicting expectations of the buyer, and how do you manage that? So that's what we take upon ourselves and solve those difficult problems. Sorry.
Kunal, thank you. Fantastic examples. But you touched upon something that Manish had brought up. Signature of craft, I think that is important. What is the essence of craft? While there is a responsibility from the brands to bring these crafts to market or businesses to market, how do you retain, and what are the challenges in retaining the signature of the craft? And I go to Ravi, who has worked with Aditya Birla Group for I don't know how many years, but and you have worked with not necessarily luxury brands, but mass premium brands in India, where you have had experience of trying to bring in handcraft products. And here I'm not talking about the craft of making a jacket, which is also a craft, but heritage crafts. And even today, the group does work with a lot of clusters. So can you please give us some perspective on that?
Thanks, Samrat. So I come from a world which is house of brands, pan-India brands, large brands operating in premium space. But the engagement with clusters has been limited, but there are examples which I like to talk about. So brands like Allen Solly, brands like Peter England, a few years back, in their own capacity, I think the engagement with certain clusters in Andhra, in Orissa, Rajasthan, Gujarat was direct. And the engagement was deep. So people would go, when I say people, product team, the design team, the sourcing team, they would have discussed all of it together. They would travel there, meet with artisans. And whatever I speak today, speaking now, is basically a summation of the interaction that I had with 1 week. I have not had direct interaction with when all these projects were on. So, like for example, Ajrak happened. They would go, and this is not something that we know. This is something not that we know. So it had to be learned. It had to be understood as to how it happens. Like I was told that Ajrak takes somewhere between 18 to 22 steps, and you have to respect that process. At the same time, we the kind of brands that we are, we believe in quality. We believe in our own process, which is pretty exhaustive. We believe in communicating with consumer, have our own set of promises. And we also have to communicate a story well. So first is to blend quality and preserve the art form which is coming from those clusters. So Ajrak was one big example. Within 2 years, these two brands would have done close to 200,000 units. Scale is something that we believe in. It's not easy to get from those spaces. But I think over a period of 2 years, different span of time, different collections, I think that happened. Bagru was one trial where they did good development. Something went through. I realized that the rejections are too much. So, and in our set of brands, the kind of mills we work with both in India and outside, we don't tolerate beyond 2% rejection. But here, 30%, 40%, 50% is pretty normal. So how to integrate that with somebody who's sitting in office, doing buying for Louis Philippe, 500 stores.
The bias for standardization with complex craft processes, right?
And craftsmen don't understand our world. We are sort of trying to understand their world. We sort of love it. People who are the design world, they know it. But brands have their own sensibility, and we have to do that. So I think that happened. Ikat from Andhra, Pochampalli, that happened. Ikat from Orissa happened. While both are Ikats, but the art forms are pretty different.
Right.
How they look is very different. So where we brought in difference was, for example, when we were doing Ajrak, the fabric would be from, say, Arvind. The fabric would be from, say, Premium Mills. The fabric would be from Vardhaman.
So it's not a complete cycle, but some parts standardized and some parts of the technique.
The things that we could control, we without coming in their way of purity of work. I think that we did. Ikat, for example, it's a yarn-dyed thing. Right, it's a different technique. We can't nominate a fabric, but can we do something on the yarn itself? So the yarn could be single ply, like 30s, 40s, while most of our brands do 280s, 2x100s, 120s double. Here we had to deal with yarns which are 20s, 40s. We attempted 2x80s, for example. The yarn would be from GTN. The yarn would be from Vardhaman. So that part of quality, which if you have good fiber, good yarn, large part of quality.
You control what you can control, and then you allow some processes to flourish.
Correct.
So. You know, interesting segue, Kanchana. You run an organization that that helps cultural enterprises grow and thrive. And I wanted to get a people perspective because Manish talked about the empathy and understanding of handloom clusters, handwoven clusters. Swikruti talked about it. You want to bring in the perspective of what we need in terms of people for these kind of collaborations to grow and thrive.
Sure, thanks. I think it's kind of made my job a tad bit easier because what we do is kind of an amalgamation of what the other four on this podium are doing. To just take a couple of minutes to speak about what we do, I represent an organization called Network of Indian Cultural Enterprises, and since Samrat said cultural enterprises, I want to actually state that there really is no formal explanation or definition of a cultural enterprise today, okay? So that is actually one of the biggest challenges. People understand culture, people understand entrepreneurship amazingly well in this country, but the marriage of culture with entrepreneurship is seldom known. So in terms of your question of the people thing from a, in terms of actually across all stakeholders, right? It's very difficult to kind of communicate this unless you bring up examples. So we work in only 5 sectors because culture in India is very diverse, very complex, and very vast. So you could go all the way from performing arts to the arts and crafts that has been spoken in detail over here. We work in 5 sectors: fashion, home decor, food and beverage, experiential tourism, and health and wellness. So if you see, they're all quite interrelated. And what we're trying to do is build an ecosystem to kind of not just preserve and protect our heritage, but also to promote it. Okay, so that's the whole movement or the mission that we've set out to do. I think in terms of challenges, it's across the board, Samrat. One of the things, as I mentioned, is the notion. So we need a lot more awareness, a lot more of such conversations to happen so that one is able to connect the dots. The second thing that one of the speakers here touched at is in terms of, you know, there's so much that's happened in this space. The interaction of various brands with the artisans, the weaver communities, that it's almost, there is also a parallel myth that they're all middlemen, right? And exploitative in nature. Now there comes brands like Rustic Hues who are trying to build a legit cultural brand. So what we're trying to do is to see how many more of Rustic Hues can grow in this country, for which you need capital, you need mentorship, you need corporate connects, and that's all the stakeholders sitting here today. If I were to draw an analogy to what we do, look at what TIE and NASCOM have done for tech in this country.
5
We're
minutes
trying
to
to
go.
do, sorry, yeah, okay.
5 minutes to go.
Sure. We're trying to do that for cultural brands. So I think, so Kunal and Manish are actually mentors to a lot of the brands we work with. And, you know, so there's a lot for everybody to come to kind of understand what the needs of enterprises like Rustic Hues need. And, you know, kind of say tomorrow we have 100 of Fab Indias and 100 of ABFRLs in this country.
But to be quickly a little more specific, what I was looking for is what kind of characteristics or traits, let's say, like we were talking about patience in terms of capital,
Correct.
right? Investors, what kind of
Yes.
investors should we be
Yes.
looking at, and what kind of traits do we inculcate in terms
So I
of
think
development?
Kunal touched upon a very interesting point, right? Now, this is a very slow pace. You can't, since you said investor, let me just pick that. We're so used to in the investor community as to, and thanks to tech, 5x returns, 10x returns. It's just an valuation that happens at a very different level. If you bring the same template to a brand like Rustic Hues, I'm sorry you're sitting here, so I'm kind of, I have to force to use that as an example. It's not going to work. What you need is extremely slow, patient capital. What you need beyond an investor writing a check is provide mentorship to entrepreneurs like Swikruti to help open doors to markets, maybe get them ABFRL Connect, say, you know, Jaipur's sources a lot of these products. So what does it take to meet the standards to get onboarded onto Jaipur? Okay, that kind of market intelligence, mentorship at various levels, market connects. You know, the standard entrepreneurship requirements are fairly standard, Samrat. But here, the only critical difference is that it has to be slow-paced and it has to go a long way. On the other side, I would also bring to the fore that there is also a responsibility on the brands to kind of provide that intelligence and information to investors, because there's a parallel narrative that goes that investors don't understand. They just come to the table and ask for 10x and 20x. But you know, there's a group of investors who are looking at investing what they call as impact funds. But from the very nature of the word impact, the onus is on the brand to say, what impact has their brand created? How much of livelihoods have they provided? What are the number of clusters they are working in? Where are the geographies? You know, what kind of art has been propagated? Now, if this amazing flow of information comes together, I think whether it's the investor community, whether it's mentorship, and the numbers that Kunal was saying, 100 crores and 200 crores, I don't think it's an impossible thing.
Slow, patient capital, that's a different kind of unicorn, I would imagine. We are all looking. Just quickly circling back, I don't think we have enough time, but Manish, you were talking about the need for storytelling, the signature of craft. Kunal touched upon it a little bit, Ravi touched upon it a little bit. Do you want to sort of bring it back?
Right. So I think if I look at it from the domestic point of view, because Kunal touched it more on the international side of it, I think we've had too many years of it being sold in a sort of a very ethnic, discounted environment. So today the whole mindset has to be fought, where people have to understand that handloom also can have that kind of a repute, where one has to be able to give it a kind of a status that unfortunately has been taken away from it over the past 30 years. And similarly, I would say even in the international, I think it is, what I have realized is that there are only a certain number of buyers who are seeking ethical, sustainable product, that they value the product. Because most of the times, my experience at international fairs is that while they love the product, but they want it at 1/10 the price, because they are obviously used to that kind of sourcing out of India. So I think both the consumers need to really become that much more, you know, sort of sensitive again to this, that as to what does handloom deliver to them. And therefore the environments have to change, and in the kind of environments we sell it in, and this whole escape from this government discounting, which is what has been seen as subsidies and discounts, which needs to be, you know, sort of wiped out.
Right, I don't know how much time we have got.
Time's
We
up.
haven't. Some questions done completely? Can we? I think there will be a lot of questions. Okay, I guess we'll have to do that. We'll have to take it offline. I think the panelists are around, at least for some time, right, Kunal? You look, Kanchana is the busiest one. But thank you so much for being patient with us and being attentive, listening to this. I hope we have more of these kind of conversations and open more doors for entrepreneurs like Swikruti and ventures like what Kunal does and what Kanchana supports. Thank you so much.